On this podcast, we're going to talk about how it was growing up in the streets of Chicago. You want to tell the people what area did you grow up in? What was the name of that a community? And what is that area known for somebody who's not from around here?
All right, yeah. I grew up in an area called Little Village, La Villita. That's in the west side of Chicago, in a part that's called South Lawndale. And that's where I grew up for quite many years.
Well, let's take it back. Maybe growing up, as you were growing up, how was that area in your eyes, like back then, you know?
Obviously, as a kid, I think everything we see is great. You're having fun. You're running around the neighborhood with the other kids. Even if you see different stuff, it becomes your normal, right? Little Village is known for a lot of things. It's known for great business district. I think I've heard that it's the second highest revenue in Chicago, next to the Mag Mile. So that says a lot, right? We know Mag Mile is very expensive. And so for 26th Street, that's what the neighborhood is also called, 26th Street, Little Village, La Vita. If anyone knows that community, to think that that's the second highest revenue, that's a good thing. That's a big thing, right? And that goes to I guess to my point that I want to make is that it's an area full of hardworking people, hardworking immigrants, first generation, second generation, third generation. So I think that's the one thing of Chicago, right? I know this is called wrong to strong, right. Chicago, but Chicago is a strong city, and we have hardworking people who work hard for their families and just want to give back, give better, you know?
Right. No, thanks for sharing that, because obviously on this podcast, we're going to be sharing what it was like growing up in the streets of Chicago. And we were talking earlier before we started recording about not everybody that grew up in Chicago or in these communities ends up going to the streets, you know, and gangs like me and you know. There's actually nice people in these communities, right?
Yeah, no, you know what? It's a great community, right? That's part of what the community is known for, right? Is hardworking people, but it's also known for a lot of street violence, right? So, but I was young, and like what I mentioned earlier about how the neighborhood was, what I seen, to me it was beautiful. But like I also mentioned, there was things around that you've seen and you kind of just really didn't faze you, right? Because those things become your normal. So with my family structure, the way it was, like I think like with a lot of people, there's fights, there's arguments, there's alcohol involved, there's all kinds of things, you know, especially with young parents, young couples.
Okay, no, thanks for sharing. I know you mentioned like a few times already some things that became the norm. Now that you're older, you probably look back and they're like, man, this is not normal. You know, this doesn't happen in all communities or all neighborhoods. Could you share like maybe a couple of examples that you witnessed as a kid that you started to consider as being normal, but now that you're older and maybe talk to people that grew up in other parts of Chicago where, let's say, it was a little bit more peaceful?
You know, the reason I can see now that those things were not normal, I see my boys as I've been raising them, that there's certain things that I see. And when they look at those things, it surprises them. And they actually tell me that's not normal, you know? And so the things that I seen growing up, and I think many of us have seen, it's just the violence that goes on, the poverty, the alcoholism. But, you know, I seen at a very young age, I started seeing shootings and gang fights, you know, being 4 or 5 years old. So those things became very normal to me. Coming home and seeing maybe the alley taped off because there was a body there, that became normal to me. You know, all those things didn't bother me or cause me anxiety or cause me like what's going on. Like, oh, that's another thing. Like, you know, my mom would be like, let's just get inside the house, and we'd go inside it, and I sit back and watch cartoons, you know.
Man, that's crazy.
So eventually, you know, around 4 years old is when I started just as a kid running around the neighborhood, and that's when I started to see things, you know.
Man, you're a kid, and this is your world. And this is just stuff that happens in your world, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. It was my world, and I didn't know anything different, you know. I didn't know anything to be like, oh, I wish I can get out of here, or why is this happening? Or it was just like, hey, and you're out, be careful. You know, as a little kid, those things didn't bother me. They weren't in the back of my mind. We just had fun because we were still kids, you know.
Right, man. Thanks for sharing that. That's pretty deep. I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate. Maybe there's some that can, but I'm sure there's a majority of people that are not from a city like this, that where they constantly see that like on a regular.